The day I walked into my parents' house wearing my firm's name on my badge, my father looked at it the way you'd look at a coupon you didn't need. He glanced, he nodded, he turned back to the game. I remember standing in their doorway with my coat still on, holding a bottle of wine I'd picked up from a place I used to not be able to afford, and thinking, nothing has changed. Not a single thing. My name is Serena. I'm 34 years old. I'm a senior partner at one of the 10 largest architecture firms in the country. I have designed buildings that have won awards I used to only read about in college. And for most of my adult life, none of that mattered the moment I stepped inside my childhood home, because to my father, I was still the girl who took too long to figure things out. He never said that out loud. He didn't have to. There are 1,000 ways a parent can make you feel small without ever raising their voice. My father wasn't a cruel man. I want to be clear about that. He wasn't the kind of father who screamed or belittled or made scenes. He was the kind who just redirected his attention, who found something more interesting to look at right when you were about to say something important, who praised other people's children in a way that felt like a comparison, even when it wasn't framed as one. His name is Bernard, though everyone calls him Bernie, and he spent 31 years as a high school football coach in the same town where I grew up. He was a local institution. Parents loved him. Players loved him. People would stop him in the grocery store to tell him their sons wouldn't be the men they were without him. He thrived in that. He genuinely did. And I think that's part of what made things complicated between us. He understood a certain kind of achievement. Tangible, visible, something you could point to on a scoreboard. He understood the kind of success that came with a jersey number and a crowd in the bleachers. What I did, what I built my career doing, existed in a world he never quite entered, and I think that gap between us widened every year I spent becoming someone he didn't have a reference point for. My mother, Diane, was different. She was a nurse for nearly 4 decades. She understood the language of quiet work, of showing up in rooms where things were hard, and doing what needed to be done without anyone clapping for you. She got it. She always got it. But she was also a woman who had spent her marriage managing the space between my father's pride and everybody else's reality. And sometimes that meant she stayed quiet when I needed her to say something. I am the youngest of 3. My brother Elliot is the middle child, became a dentist, and my father understood that perfectly, something with a clear path, a degree, a title you could explain at a dinner table. My sister Carla is the oldest. She married young, moved 20 minutes from my parents, and has 4 kids my father can watch play soccer on Saturday mornings. He goes to every game. He has never once come to see anything I built. When I was in college, studying architecture at Georgia Tech, my father asked me, once, at Thanksgiving, what an architect actually does all day. I explained it. He listened for about 45 seconds and then said, well, your cousin Marcus just made partner at his law firm. Can you believe that? 29 years old. Marcus wasn't even at the table. He wasn't even in the state, but somehow he was there. I've thought about that moment more than I should have. Not because it was the worst thing my father ever said. It wasn't even close, but because it was so perfectly him. He didn't put me down. He just lifted someone else up in a way that made me feel invisible, and then changed the subject, and that was that. Conversation over. Achievement unacknowledged, Serena invisible again. I stopped trying to explain my work to him around the time I turned 26. By then I had left Atlanta and moved to Chicago. My firm, Hudson & Voss, had recruited me out of a smaller practice in Savannah, and I threw myself into it the way you do when work is the only place you feel fully seen. I worked on a mixed-use development on the south side that took 3 years and ended up on the cover of Architectural Digest. I was part of the team that redesigned a community health center in Pilsen that the mayor came to the ribbon cutting for. I didn't call home to tell my father about either of those things. What would be the point? My mother knew, of course. I told her everything. She would listen, and she would say things like, oh, Serena, that's just incredible. And I could hear the pride in her voice, and I would hold on to it like a life raft. But even she, in the gentlest way possible, would eventually say something like, your father does care, you know. He just doesn't know how to show it with the things you do. And I would say, I know, Mom. And I would mean it, kind of. But meaning something and being at peace with it are 2 very different things. My parents' 35th wedding anniversary fell on a Saturday in October. Carla organized the party. She's always been the one who does that, who holds the family calendar and makes sure everyone shows up. And she'd reserved a private room at the restaurant where my parents had their first date. It was the kind of place that had been in our town for decades, the kind with low lighting and cloth napkins and a prix fixe menu that my father would complain about, because he preferred to order à la carte, but he'd eat everything on the plate anyway. I flew in from Chicago on a Friday afternoon. I hadn't been home in 7 months. My mother picked me up at the airport. She hugged me for a long time in the arrivals lane while someone behind her honked, and she didn't move an inch. That's my mother. She has always known what mattered and what didn't. In the car, she told me my father had been talking about the party all week, that he was excited, that he'd even gotten a new suit. He's been in a good mood, she said, merging onto the highway. Good, I said, and I meant it. I wanted the weekend to be good. I had decided on the plane ride down that I was going to let it be good. I wasn't going to look for signs that he wasn't proud of me. I wasn't going to measure the length of his hugs, or count how many times he asked about my work versus Elliot's. I was going to just be there, present, as his daughter, and let the rest go. I had been telling myself that for about a decade. I was still working on the actual execution. The party was the next evening. I spent the morning with my mother, helping her finish the centerpieces she'd been making from photos, little cardboard frames with pictures of her and my father through the years. I found one of them from what must have been the late 1980s, both of them so young it almost hurt to look at. My father had his arm around her and was laughing at something off camera. His whole face was open. I forgot sometimes that he'd been like that once. My father came downstairs around noon, and we had lunch together. The three of us. He asked me how the flight was. I told him fine. He asked if Chicago was getting cold yet. I told him it had been in the 50s. He nodded. He told me that Elliot's daughter had just started taking piano lessons. And there it was. Not mean, not intentional, probably, just the redirect. Just the pivot away from me and toward someone else's story, because someone else's story was easier to hold. I said that was great about the piano lessons. I asked what song she was learning. And then I excused myself to go get ready for the party, and I sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, and I took 3 slow breaths the way my therapist had taught me, and I told myself it was going to be fine. The restaurant was warm and full of people who'd known my parents for years. Former players of my father's showed up. Nurses my mother had worked with, neighbors, old family friends, people from church. It was the kind of gathering where everyone was a little louder than usual, because the occasion called for it, and the room had that specific energy of people who are genuinely happy for someone else, which is rarer than you'd think. I was standing near the far end of the bar, talking with my Aunt Claudette, my mother's sister who I adore, when my father appeared on the other side of the room with a man I'd never seen before. The man was tall, gray-haired, wearing a blazer that said money without trying to. My father was standing very straight, the way he stood when he was around someone he was impressed by. I'd seen that posture my whole life. Shoulders back, chest up. The laugh that came out a little louder than his regular laugh. I watched him clap the man on the shoulder. I watched him gesture around the room with the kind of expansive pride he usually reserved for third-quarter turnarounds. Claudette noticed me looking. "That's some developer," she said. "His company built that new hotel outside of town. Your father's been talking about him for weeks." I nodded. I looked away. About 40 minutes later, the evening was winding toward dinner service, and my phone buzzed. I stepped out to the small hallway near the restrooms to take the call. It was James Whitfield, the senior partner above me at Hudson & Voss, my mentor, the man who'd pulled me into the firm and pushed me toward every big project I'd ever worked on. He apologized for calling on a weekend. He said it was important. The call was about a project I'd been in quiet conversations about for 6 months. A civic arts center in downtown Nashville, a massive commission, the kind of project that an architect builds a career around, the kind that gets named after someone. The city's selection committee had voted. We got it. James was laughing. He said my name kept coming up in the room. He said the committee chair, a woman named Dr. Phyllis Okafor, who ran the city's cultural development office, and whose opinion carried enormous weight, had specifically cited my previous work. She had read about the Pilsen Health Center. She had requested my portfolio by name. I stood in that hallway with the sounds of my parents' anniversary party coming through the wall, and I pressed my hand flat against my chest because I didn't know what else to do with it. "You need to be in Nashville Monday morning," James said. "We're meeting with the full committee at 9. "I'll be there," I said. I stayed in the hallway for another minute after we hung up. I thought about calling my mother over. I thought about walking back into that room and finding my father and saying, "What? Hey, Dad. A city just chose me by name to design a building that will stand for 100 years. Do you want to know what that feels like?" Instead, I fixed my lipstick and walked back in. I found my mother first. I whispered it to her quickly, close to her ear. She grabbed my hand under the table and squeezed it so hard, I thought she might never let go. Her eyes went wet immediately, and she shook her head like she was trying to clear it, and then she laughed this small, overwhelmed laugh that I will remember for the rest of my life. "Tell your father," she said. "Later," I said. "Tonight's for you and Dad." She looked at me for a long moment. She knew what I meant. We both knew what I meant. The rest of the evening was fine. Dinner was good. People gave toasts that made my mother cry in the nice way. My father stood up and said some things about 35 years with the woman who made him a better man. And I believed him, I did, because whatever complicated thing lived between him and me, I never doubted that he loved my mother completely. After dinner, people milled around. The developer my father had been so taken with was leaving, and my father walked him toward the exit right past where I was standing with Claudette. I stepped back slightly, the automatic reflex of a daughter who has spent 30 years making herself easy to move around. The developer stopped. He looked at me. "Are you Serena Park?" he said. I said yes. His face changed into something I recognized, the specific expression of someone who has been looking forward to meeting you. "I thought so. I saw you speak at the ULI conference in Atlanta last spring, the Urban Design Panel. I've been hoping to run into you. I've been trying to get a meeting with Hudson and Voss for months. We have a development going up in Charlotte that I think you'd be very interested in." He handed me his card. His name was Richard Holt. His company was one I knew well enough that the weight of his card felt different than a regular card. I said I'd have James's office reach out on Monday. He said he'd look forward to it. And then he left. I didn't look at my father right away. I took a breath first. I looked at Claudette, who was staring at me with an expression somewhere between delight and awe. And then I looked at my father. He was standing very still. He had watched all of it, the recognition, the card, the handshake. He had watched this man, the man he'd been standing straight for all evening, the man he'd been laughing his big laugh for. Stop walking to find me. I don't know what I expected to see on his face. I had imagined this kind of moment before, in the abstract, in the way you imagine things when you are young and still hoping. I had imagined relief, maybe, or a kind of dawning, or even just surprise. What I saw was something more complicated than any of those things. He looked like a man doing a quiet calculation. Like something was rearranging itself behind his eyes, and he wasn't sure yet where the pieces were going to land. My mother appeared at his elbow. She had seen it too. She took his arm gently, the way she'd probably been taking his arm for 35 years. And she didn't say anything. He looked at me and said, "You know Richard Holt?" "He knows my work," I said. A pause. "From a conference," I added. "I spoke on a panel." Another pause, longer this time. "Your firm? You're doing well there," he said. It wasn't quite a question and it wasn't quite a statement. "Yes," I said, and that was it. The restaurant was clearing out. People were getting their coats. I hugged Claudette, hugged my mother for a long time, let my father pat me on the shoulder the way he always did. One firm pat, the period at the end of a sentence, and I told them I'd see them at breakfast. In the Uber back to my mother's house, I stared out the window at the streetlights going by and I tried to figure out what I was feeling. I wasn't triumphant. That's the thing nobody tells you. Those moments you've been imagining for years. The moments where the world shows someone who you actually are. They don't feel the way you think they will. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired. And behind the tired, there was something else. Something that had been sitting in my chest for a very long time, quietly, without a name, and in the back of that Uber it started to feel a little lighter. Breakfast the next morning was just the three of us. My mother made biscuits. My father sat across from me at the kitchen table with his coffee, and for a while nobody said anything, because that's how early mornings in their house had always been. Then he said, "How long have you been with your firm?" 7 years, I said. He nodded slowly. "And that project you mentioned, in Nashville." I hadn't mentioned Nashville to him, which meant my mother had. "A civic arts center," I said. "Downtown. It's a big commission." He turned his coffee mug in his hands. He does that when he's thinking, rotates it in small increments like he's trying to find the right angle. "A building that'll be there a long time," he said. "Yes," I said. "A long time." He nodded again. He didn't say anything else right away, and I didn't fill the silence. I had spent so many years filling silences between us with explanations, justifications, summaries of my work calibrated to land with him. I didn't have any left. My mother set a plate of biscuits between us and sat down. She poured herself coffee. The three of us sat in the morning quiet of the house where I'd grown up. Finally, my father said, "I don't always know what to say about what you do. I don't know that world." I looked at him. "I know that's not an excuse," he said. He looked down at his mug. I didn't know how to be proud of something I didn't understand. And then it felt too late to say so. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure what was available to me in that moment. Forgiveness felt too big and too quick, and also somehow beside the point. Anger felt old and familiar and exhausting. What I felt was mostly just present. Sitting in the kitchen, in the morning light, with two people who had known me my whole life and with whom everything was still, somehow, unfinished. I understand that, I finally said. I just wish you'd tried to learn it. He received that quietly. He didn't argue it or redirect away from it. He just sat with it. My mother looked at the two of us with the expression she has worn my entire life, the one that holds love and sorrow and patience in equal measure, and she said, "More biscuits?" My father reached for one. I reached for one too. I flew back to Chicago that afternoon. I had Nashville in the morning, and a building to design, and a career that existed fully and completely, whether or not anyone in that kitchen had a reference point for it. I thought about what my father said, that he didn't know how to be proud of something he didn't understand. I had spent so many years wanting him to figure that out on his own, because it felt like the kind of thing a parent should just know how to do. And maybe it was, maybe he should have. But I was 34 years old, and I was tired of waiting for a door to open, that I was perfectly capable of walking away from. Because here's what I know now that I didn't know at 22 or 26 or even 30. My value was never inside his recognition of it. I didn't become an architect the day my father understood what that meant. I became one long before he had any say in the matter. The building I design in Nashville will stand long after every person in that restaurant is gone. It will stand after every silence at my parents' kitchen table, after every pivot to someone else's story, after every pat on the shoulder goodbye. It will stand because I built it, because I earned the right to build it, because a woman in a boardroom in Nashville read my name in a file and said, "Her." Not because my father saw it coming, not because he stood up at the right moment, just because I showed up over and over in rooms he never entered, and I did the work. That was always enough. It just took me a long time to let it be.